Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again. It's Q&A time once again. Asked for your questions on my YouTube community page and also on Twitter. Got quite a few on Twitter especially, so I want to run through quite a lot of questions regarding Chelsea today. So thank you for sending them. As always, apologies to those I can't get to. Let's get straight into it because there are a lot of questions, starting from my YouTube community page here from Mr. Harry Chelsea. What do you think of our tactics? I'm not loving the three centre-backs and would love to see a change to a 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1. We have a lot of attacking players and feel the formation isn't giving them the best opportunity to flourish. Need to get the best from Havertz and Ziyech and Pulisic. Yeah, I've been encouraged by the change in formation. I know I've got several questions about formations, as I do, I think, pretty regularly, and that tells you maybe the confusion that Tuchel's dealt with and Chelsea have dealt with in recent years. It's encouraging to see that he's kind of Tuchel looked to evolve the team to a 4, because at the very least, I believe he wants this team to be as flexible as possible, a bit like how Pep sees his City squad and has moulded his City squad, and just the way I think modern football's going now in terms of being able to switch to a 3 and a 4. One of Tuchel's early quotes was, it's something about sort of, rather than, I can't exactly remember the quote, but he was asked about formations and changing them and being flexible. And it's how I think you live the formation or something like that. It was kind of like you have these base principles of play, and it shouldn't really matter whether you're in a 3 or a 4 or whatever the formation is moving forward. Those principles stay, those consistent trademarks of his game remain. That's where Tuchel, I think he wants to take this squad. In terms of the attack, yeah, you want to see more attacking flair. There have been many times in games under Tuchel where, particularly in the Premier League, maybe not in the Champions League, but in the Premier League where maybe we've drew 1-1 or 0-0, where just kind of feel, do we need 3 centre-backs, particularly when we're up against a team we're so dominant within possession and things are breaking down in the final third there. Everton, I think, before Christmas was a prime example of this. And sure, on that night, COVID had decimated the options for Tuchel. But just examples like that where I just would like to see maybe a bit more flexibility from Tuchel. But, you know, I do understand why he instantly went to a back 3 to protect certain players, and that was the genius of Tuchel, particularly in central midfield last year. So I think we'll see that, and I think summer additions will absolutely help us move into a position where you will see a lot more attackers, I think, in the final third. Adil asked, what would be the maximum amount you think a club will be willing to pay for Kepa during the summer, and realistically, at what cost should we sell him for in the summer? Tough to know, but I do think it's encouraging that Chelsea are at least expecting bids, or you know, talks are probably already happening, or there are suggestions. It shows you how much Kepa, his reputation has changed over the past 12 months, and I think rightly so. He's had a good few weeks, he's had a good few months, I think, in terms of where he was 12 months ago. When we're not getting anywhere near 70 million, I still think the frailties in his game, because I know people are pointing out his save percentage is better than Edouard Mendy, but I think that is presented without context, because Kepa has not played the same amount of games as Edouard Mendy in the Premier League this season, and over a longer term where he's really under the spotlight and he's number 1 again, you know, there has been a freedom, I think, to Kepa that he didn't have before Mendy arrived, where maybe there's that less pressure, you know, there's that sense of confidence within him, but he isn't the main guy. He isn't going to be playing week in, week out. The spotlight isn't going to be on him as much. So maybe that's helped him. If he goes to another club, will that change? I'd say around 30 million, but the market's so inflated right now in terms of numbers for players. It may be more than that. Chelsea feel... I'd be amazed if it goes over 50 million for Kepa. I really would. And getting the wages off, I think, would be big as well. I think sometimes we overestimate the fee and more the wages, what that means to the club's finances. So it's encouraging. We'll have to see what happens in the summer on that one. John asks 3 questions here, so I'll run through them quickly. Imagine money is no object. What's your dream starting formation / lineup next season? Sorry, no Diego Costa allowed. That is criminal. Would the Club World Cup / Super Cup and a 3rd place finish be a successful season given the circumstances, or do we still need to do more? And your favourite Chelsea goal of all time? Let's start with the easiest one. Favourite Chelsea goal of all time is Frank Lampard's 2nd against Bolton in 2005 when he rounded Yuri Asklananen to seal the Premier League title. The second one, no, actually, let's go to the top one in terms of, I'm not going to run through a lineup because that would take too long, and there's probably a whole video on that I could be doing in the coming months as we get closer to the summer transfer window. But I'd go over 4-3-3 as my formation. I'd love to see Chelsea move back to that. And in terms of where we finish, it depends on the Premier League finish for me. If we finish like 19 or 20 points behind Man City again, you don't feel like major progress has been made. If we finish lower than 19 points, not 18, let's go for like 11 or 10 or even under 10, I think would be brilliant given the current circumstances. Then you feel like you can look at that and go, there is progress. And it's all about closing that again next season, or even overtaking City next season if that's possible. And it's also about, the rest of the competitions. I mean, are we saying there's so many variables in football? It's so hard to know, especially at a club like Chelsea. Are we getting to the finals of a lot of competitions? Is it sort of heartbreaking defeats in finals or semi-finals? But then you kind of look at it in the context and say, actually, Chelsea have done well, or do we have some really disappointing exits in cups that we're still in? That's hard to tell. But I do think in the league, it's about closing that gap to City massively. A bridge too far asks, are we giving Lukaku the best service for him to score goals? Obviously one of the biggest questions this season by far in terms of Chelsea and our attack. We did it on Saturday in the Club World Cup final, but he got one chance and he scored. I think sometimes our game just hasn't been suited to him. I think, and this is something that several Chelsea attackers have suffered with, the kind of slow, monotonous at times play and possession through the centre of the park. When Lukaku, I see a lot of accusations that Lukaku is lazy and doesn't make runs. Sometimes he's off camera when he's doing that. If you're watching it on TV in the frame, he is making those runs. And I just think it's a natural confidence thing. If you're a striker, especially someone like Lukaku with his kind of physical build, even though he's been in immaculate shape in recent years, why are you expending energy on runs that there's just no point? If I've seen it over and over again. And Werner was the same last year, despite my criticism of Werner when he gets the ball. He was making those runs also. There's a lot of players, a lot of Chelsea attackers and strikers who have made runs where the ball doesn't reach them. We're not playing that quick pass that we probably should be. So there's that, because you watch Lukaku's game at his best when he can turn and run, and I do think the two striker or having a split striker system suits him a lot better, because it allows him to drift onto that right channel where he can run onto the ball. And then it's also a case of us playing the ball quicker, which I started to see a little bit more when we moved to that 4 and we had an extra attacker further up the field. So there's that. Lukaku, I think, needs to do more in terms of his demeanour. When he's confident, when he's in the sort of mood he was, I think, in the Club World Cup, even when he wasn't getting the service, I was seeing the link up and sort of the sacrifice or the humility to be able to maybe shield the ball, hold off defenders, which sure he's not always a big fan of doing, but he can do it with his physique and bringing others into play. Then you see, that's the dominant striker role you want to see from him. So I think it's about Chelsea just generally being quicker with their play at times, rather than kind of the slow, controlled possession that I think has hurt several Chelsea strikers, not just Lukaku. Robinho asks, most underrated player from the first Mourinho era? That is a tough question. Luckily, this question comes after I've been watching a lot of 04-05, my favourite Chelsea season. I might even write a book about it one day, because I just love that season. It's a difficult one because, we always think... I think that we look back at that squad and you pick out the players that then went on to do even greater things. So Frank, Cech, JT, Didier. Didier's first season, I guess if you were to just isolate, it wasn't incredible. I personally, Robin, going back and watching that, Robin obviously had, his injury problems were so devastating because he was brilliant. Damien Duff was wonderful, he really was. And watching that attack, that 4-3-3, and kind of how productive it was, and then comparing it to Chelsea's attacking problems, I mean, you get a real appreciation for those players that maybe we took for granted at the time. Claude Makelele, you could say, is underappreciated, but I think the fact that a role was named after him pretty much cements his legacy. I'd say it's a tie between Damien Duff and Ida Johnson, because I loved watching Johnson play. I really did. The way he went from a striker to a central midfielder at times, that versatility, and obviously he was a player pre-Roman that we bought from Bolton, and just I loved his celebration. I just loved the guile of him. There is a bit of Kai Havertz that reminds me of Ida Johnson for some reason. So if Kai can kind of become that type of player in Tuchel's system, I'd love that. So I'd go between Duff and Johnson, because I think both of those players were really good for Chelsea's attack. Crippy Chelsea asks, how do you feel about Roman wanting a sporting director, and are you happy with the rumoured one who is employed at Barca? And then he does mention under this that the name of the guy is Roman Plains. Yeah, obviously out of work at the moment. I've seen this story. Having checked it and speaking to some people, I mean, I wouldn't go too far on it at the moment. I think Sport is the one account at the moment, or at least a news source that has reported it. So I haven't quite seen... Say if Matt Law starts reporting it, or Adam Newson starts reporting it, or Liam Toomey or Simon Johnson, then I think game on, or at least you can take it a lot more seriously. But just a general topic of a sporting director, I'd be really encouraged to see someone come in to kind of replace Emanalo. I do worry that some of our best signings in recent years, like Edouard Mendy, you could kind of argue that Petr Cech has kind of played a sporting director role at times with Edouard Mendy, that deal. And that kind of came, as Chelsea Youth pointed out, that brilliant signing came from people outside of the club's actual sports scouting department, which kind of says a lot. And Chelsea, we've had some very good signings. I was thinking back to the 2020 summer where, sure, we can look at the attacking signings and not be that impressed. But you look at Ben Chilwell, you look at Thiago Silva, Edouard Mendy, players that have improved Chelsea drastically and have really given something to Chelsea that he didn't have before. But I guess the argument you would make on that, Petr Cech's influence on Edouard Mendy, Frank Lampard pursuing Ben Chilwell above any other target. So you want that kind of consistent vision, and that's what a sporting director could bring. Now, that isn't to say that you bring in a sporting director and everything is perfect, because there's so many variables, obviously, and I'm not sitting here and telling you just get any sporting director and all our problems will be fixed like that. Obviously, not simple. But I do think having that consistent vision of what type of player are we looking for, what is the system of play that Chelsea consistently want to go for, working with the head coach the way Michael Edwards and Jurgen Klopp work together at Liverpool. The Mohamed Salah story of apparently Klopp wanting Julian Brandt instead of Salah, and very much Edwards championing Mo Salah's stats. Kind of that's an example of where a sporting director really plays a key role in recruitment, because obviously that turned out to be one of the best deals that Liverpool have ever made. So you want a replication of that at Chelsea. I want to see more consistency in targets over a number of years, players that don't suddenly look awkward. The transfer market is difficult. We aren't always... You're not going to have an 100% record on transfers. You just aren't. But I think a club of Chelsea's resource and finances should be getting more right than wrong. And that you could argue that hasn't really been the case in recent years. So a sporting director, I think, in terms of having that chain of command and sort of that unified vision and kind of that consistency in scouting and recruiting, I think would be a lot more important. So we may have to see. There's been other names I know people have thrown out before. So we'll see if anything changes in the summer with Roman. Lee asks, too many Chelsea big accounts talked about the CDM role, buying Rice/Tchouameni. Why do you think they talk about that, while on one hand our problems are attackers, not midfielders, and on the other hand we have already got two of top 10 midfielders in the world in Georgie and Kante? Someone replied to this, Neo replied to this and kind of responded in the way that I am, because it's a team game, and if you have certain players in certain positions, particularly in central midfield, that allow you to do other things, to be able to cover more ground, to be able to take more risks, that's a big thing, particularly if we're talking about the attack. Maybe we're all guilty of we block off sections of the pitch and then blame that section of the pitch, when actually, of course, it's a team game, especially the way the game is moving in terms of positions not being a set anymore, and kind of how players flow in and out and they rotate, and how a system works and how fluid things can be. Those are all very relevant things, aren't they? So the reason I want a Declan Rice and a Tchouameni is because we really haven't had a central midfielder of that ilk, of that kind of profile since Nemanja Matic. Someone who can sit but also can progress the ball, cover larger grounds of space, something like Jorginho just can't do. N'Golo has not only had fitness problems, but he's someone that I think as a coach you'd want to press up the pitch a bit more. You want him to have that kind of freedom because he's such a unique midfielder. I think pinning him down to a 6 role that Frank did for a period of time, you aren't really getting the benefit of him. And I think that's where Tuchel found the great balance of shifting him back to sort of that double 6 that Conte did. And you kind of got the best of both worlds, where sometimes Kante could move into kind of a number 8 role alongside Mason. Especially the Real Madrid semi-final, I think, in the second leg especially, was proof of this, absolutely, because Kante's movement helped Chelsea start attacks. So I think Declan Rice, for instance, or Tchouaméni, just allows you more variety and more flexibility in central midfield. Tuchel won't have the fear potentially of saying, I want to move to a back four. We're playing 2 number 8s today, Mount and say Gallagher, and we're going to go at this game because Chelsea need to be dominant. And you have this fear that suddenly, if that central midfielder, that defensive midfielder is exposed, they have no capacity and they can be easily bossed around. That is something that Jorginho, for all his strengths, that's been a clear frailty. So there is that, and it opens up space, and you know, I think it probably allows Chelsea to be a little bit more risky and to be able to commit more men forward. So it is a complex question. Now, I'm not sitting here and saying that you buy a CDM and all of our problems are solved. It's about selling players in other positions that have been here for too long. It's about the attack absolutely being more clarified over what we want from an attack and the sort of profiles that we're bringing in that suit each other, that don't counteract each other. I'm going to say this for everything, and it's a very simple and obvious thing. I'm not breaking any new ground here. I'm not claiming to be some sort of genius for saying this. Transfers should expand your options, not limit them. And that is something, unfortunately, that Chelsea have had in recent years that just cost us time and again, where too many players in his current squad seem to limit our options. Diogo Jota, for instance, helps Liverpool. He gives them more options. You see how he improves their attack. Jota coming into Liverpool hasn't created a massive headache for Jurgen Klopp, where I'm like, I don't know where I'm going to play this guy. If I play him, suddenly my whole attack breaks down, and you know, we can't play a certain way because he comes in and he can only play this style of way, or he only excels in this formation. At a club like Chelsea, at the level Chelsea want to be operating at, with the clubs we're competing with in the Premier League and in Europe, you can't have too many of those players who ask more questions than give a solution. So those are my feelings on it. Yeah, I want a CDM. I have for several years, because I think Chelsea, particularly in the Premier League, need more bite. I think need more aggression and need more flexibility in central midfield, and I think Declan Rice would absolutely provide that. And both Kante and Jorginho, you know, they're now 30. Kante's had serious injury problems, despite how miraculous he's been for Chelsea, one of our greatest signings. And Jorginho, I think, has reached the peak of his career at Chelsea. I'm not sure he's going to get much better than this. And if you want to win a Premier League title, if you want to take more risks, if you have Jorginho as the number 6 on his own, as we've seen in the Premier League since he arrived under Sarri, you are opening yourselves up for problems on transition. So those are my feelings on it, really. But that is it. We've nearly got to 20 minutes Q&A. Thanks for all the questions you guys asked today. We covered a lot of ground. There's always questions about central midfield. There's so many questions about Rice and Tchouaméni. If you want to go and kind of hear my answer, if you're asking me about Rice or Tchouaméni, I answered it last week. So please don't ask it again, because I just won't answer it, because I have answered it before. So that's something we have covered, and I absolutely understand it, because they are 2 massive targets for Chelsea, and we could see both, or at least one of them, come in this summer. So it is a big talking point. But thank you again for your questions. Thank you for your kind support on the channel in recent days. Thank you guys again. Thank you for watching, and subscribe, hit that like button, comment, share, do what you got to do. Have a great rest of your week, and I will see you again very soon.